He used to be called Citizen 625726. He used to call himself Unbroken. When he left his dystopian city behind, he thought he had found paradise. What he found was uglier and darker than anything he could have imagined. This is his story. This is Inferior. Now available in ebook, paperback, and audio form. Links in the description. Last time, we bore witness to the ancient feud between two different clans of future samurai nerds, the rather inglorious birth of Duel, ancestor of the Kastaka family, his campaign of vengeance against the Techno Church for destroying his homeworld, losing his wife, and having to Frankenstein his two daughters in order to ensure the continuation of his family line. Now we skip ahead many decades and at least 2 generations. Duel's grandson, Berard, Baron Kastaka, grew to manhood, married, although the name of his wife is never given, and had a daughter named Edna, whom he trained personally in the ruthless warrior tradition of his house. Meanwhile, the Kastaka family became modestly wealthy via the export of Marmola's beautiful high-quality marble, which was used for the building of aristocratic palaces mostly. All the while, they maintained the oath Duel had made to the weird spirit bird Ganges and kept secret the existence of the mystic anti-gravity producing oil epiphyte. Edna, proud and headstrong, was hard-pressed to find a mate that she would consider worthy of her. But at last she found it in the form of a space pirate named Othon von Salza. Despite his initial disapproval, Berard bowed to his daughter's wishes. The two were married and had a single son, Bari. And so the Kastaka family lived on Marmola, earning their bread and meat through the harvesting of Marmola's marble, alongside a small, close-knit band of followers and vassals. But all good things come to an end, and the peace of Marmola came to an end when emissaries of the Techno Church came, placing an order for thousands of multi-ton blocks of marble to build a new palace for the Techno Pope. Normally, the Kastakas would fete their guests and ply them with so much alcohol that they would fall into a drunken stupor. By the time they woke up, all the marble would already be loaded in their ships and ready to take off. But this time, because the order and the guests were unexpected, they were able to catch at least a glimpse of the process by which the Kastakas carved giant blocks of marble for delivery. No problem. After all, as long as nobody used the epiphyte openly, the secret would remain safe. But of course, because the plot demands it, in the midst of the operation, Othon found himself pinned underneath just such a block, and was likely to be crushed to death unless something was done to save him. Something, of course, meaning using the epiphyte, in the presence of witnesses. Only Berard was determined to keep the family secret at the cost of Othon's life, with Edna, Bari, and the senior Kastaka retainers against him. And so the epiphyte was used to levitate the great stone block, and the Techno Church became aware of something that would revolutionize technology in the galaxy as they knew it. Ironically, Othon cursed his family for betraying the old oath to save his life, much to the approval of his father-in-law. But the damage had been done. The genie was out of the bottle and there would be no putting it back. This they all understood. Later, during a family meeting, Berard fought and ultimately bested Othon in an impromptu duel. It was to be Berard's final lesson to his son-in-law. A lesson being that only by losing does one learn how to win. Now that the existence of the epiphyte was known, Berard knew that every faction in the galaxy, political, commercial, and religious, would fight over it. And while he was resigned to that fact, he had no desire to bear witness to it. And so he passed on to Othon both the birthmark of Ganges, the once immortal guardian of Marmola, and the title Baron of Castaka. Then Berard killed himself through self-asphyxiation, literally holding his breath until he died. Of course, exactly as Berard feared, once word of the epiphyte spread, everybody started fighting each other in order to get their hands on it. The space above Marmola was practically choked with ships of every faction, every planet, every religion imaginable, each trying to blow each other out of the sky so that they and they alone could monopolize the use of epiphyte. In the end, the Imperial faction, i.e. the faction loyal to the Emperor and Empress of the galaxy, won out, only for one of their elite units, the Black Endo Guard, to make like the Praetorian Guard and backstab them. They then deposited an army of 1,500 soldiers to lay siege to the Castaka citadel and its garrison of 150 warriors. Literally odds of 10 to 1 against the Castaka. Edna insisted on fighting them head-on, demonstrating that she'd obviously expended all her good decision-making points when she decided to make Othon her husband. When said husband decided that they should employ less suicidal tactics, Edna decided to go full-on honor before reason, went outside alone, and essentially demanded that the Black Endo Guard turn against their corrupt generals. Naturally, she was obliterated. Hers and Othon's son Bari would have gone out with her, except Othon broke his legs to stop him from following his mother into death. Othon then divided his forces, and while the bulk of the Castaka retainers attacked the Black Endo Guard using epiphyte levitating blocks of Marmola marble as cover, Othon used secret tunnels built beneath the citadel to literally get under the Black Endo Guard's feet and kill them at close range. For while these superlative warriors were good with guns and modern technology, they it seemed had completely neglected fighting in close quarters combat. Between the heroic bravery of the Castaka retainers and Othon's tactics, the entirety of the Black Endo Guard was wiped out, at the price of every defender except for Othon and Bari. Once word of the Black Endo Guard's treachery and Othon's amazing feats got out, the Emperor and the Empress of the galaxy arrived personally to negotiate with the new Baron Castaka and his son. In exchange for the location and use of the epiphyte, Othon asked 3 things. 1, that he and his son receive a modest share of the profits of the epiphyte. No exact number is given, but apparently it was enough to make the Castakas so wealthy that they would never have to work for generations to come. 2nd, a new world for him and his son to live on, and specifically he demanded that the Castaka citadel be transplanted to this new planet stone by stone. This was done, and the lush world of Othon became the Castaka's new home. 3rd and finally, Othon asked of his imperial masters a gift to give Bari back the joy lost with the crippling of his legs. This took the form of a magnificent white horse, brought into being through the finest genetic engineering, as the species itself was extinct. It had cost 100 tons of gold and the labors of the best geneticists of the Techno Church to create. And Bari loved it. He named the horse Shazam and pretty much spent every waking hour on horseback, usually hunting. It seemed that the horse did indeed restore the joy that Bari had lost with the crippling of his legs. With this and the immense wealth brought in from their share of the epiphyte sales, the only dull spot in the Castaka's existence was Othon's loneliness, now that his wife was dead. Otherwise, father and son lived well, enjoying all the privileges of interstellar nobility and the loyalty and service of the natives of Othon. But of course, this all had to come to an end. One night, a group of pirates arrived on Othon, planning to steal Shazam, after all, it is the only horse in existence, and sell it for a fortune. Both Othon and Bari discovered the theft and pursued the bandits, who were forced to move slowly in their return to the ship because of a thick fog. Alas, father and son hunted separately. Othon killed 3 of the bandits with ease, then impaled a 4th with a lance, only to discover that he had mistakenly killed his own son. Despite his crippled legs, Bari had managed to track down the 4th pirate and recover the horse, only to be slain by his own father in a cruel accident. As Othon collapsed in despair beside his dying son, one of the bandits close to death got off a final shot that took the Baron in the groin. Othon survived, but at the cost of his genitals, and ever afterwards required cybernetics built into his pelvis in order to walk around. Between this and the fact that he'd killed Bari by mistake, Othon unsurprisingly might have found death preferable. As the Baron withdrew into his bitterness and regret, events were afoot in the wider galaxy. For you see, the Emperor and Empress who ruled it all had been trying to have a healthy child for years without success, as apparently the Emperor's sperm was completely sterile. But at last, after decades of genetic engineering, it was finally achieved. A healthy ovum from the Empress was successfully fertilized by a modified fertile sperm from the Emperor. The result of all this was an embryo that could have been seen as either an abomination or as a sign of great things to come. A pair of fraternal Siamese twins. Unfortunately, word of this got out, and the opportunists began to make their plans. As a heavily armed convoy sought to transport the fetus to its parents' home on the Golden Planet, capital of the Empire, they flew past what they thought was a small planet, but turned out to be a gigantic space carrier disguised as a planet by pirates. So evenly matched were the pirates and the defenders that the battle threatened to last for months. To make matters worse, no one was ready to rush to the aid of the Imperial heir. Opportunistic vultures to a man, the great and good of the Empire simply sat back and waited, most hoping that the pirates would win so that they could buy the Imperial fetus from them and thus use it as a puppet to rule the galaxy. Thus abandoned by their own nobility, the Emperor and Empress were forced to put out a call to anyone willing and able to help them save their child. Othon von Salza was among those who responded, and the only one with the will and the ability to know how to do it. First, he led a bombing attack on the foe planetoid, forcing the pirates to defend their base, only to then lure them into a trap, employing concealed Imperial fighters and booby-trapped asteroids, destroying the pirates in their totality without a single loss on his own side. Despite this incredible feat, many in the Imperial court disdained the Baron, possibly out of jealousy, possibly because some of them had hoped to take advantage of this situation and he just foiled it for them. But the Imperial couple were genuinely grateful, and for his great feat, bestowed upon him the title of Metabaron. But the honor remained an empty comfort for Othon, for the death of Bari still haunted him. Nothing gave him pleasure now. Even the attentions of the two daughters of his most faithful servant, Ikuta. However, the Empress promised the newly minted Metabaron a gift. Eventually that gift arrived, but Othon refused to see any visitors. However, it seemed that the visitor was determined to see him, somehow subverting the electronic locks on the door to his chambers. Her name was Honorata of the Shabda Oud, a mysterious and somewhat sinister all-female order often feared to be witches, commonly referred to disparagingly as whore priestesses. Of course, Othon fell in love with her on sight because, once again, given the choice between logic and melodrama, Jodorowsky will always choose melodrama. But of course, this was a union that could bear no fruit given Othon's lack of equipment. But the Shabda Oud are capable of many things beyond the human norm. Using her sharp nails, Honorata drew a single drop of Othon's blood. Then, she had him place that drop of blood inside her vagina. Via her superhuman psychic abilities, she would convert the blood droplet into essentially sperm, thus allowing her to have the child that Othon so desired. As an added bonus, she linked her nervous system to Othon's so that both would be capable of experiencing the intense pleasure of this conception together. Thus, Othon and Honorata created an heir to the Kastaka line through an insanely bonkers sci-fi equivalent of Immaculate Conception. And for those who've seen the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune, yes, this was indeed based on elements that Jodorowsky had intended to use in his adaptation of Frank Herbert's great work. it would not have been a very faithful adaptation. One fateful day, while Othon was out riding Shazam, Ikuta, his loyal servant, came with terrible news. His daughters, Othon's bed warmers until recently, had kidnapped Honorata and were preparing to throw themselves and her from the top of the citadel. Partly out of superstitious belief that Honorata was a witch that had hypnotized Othon, and partly out of simple jealousy. Luckily, Othon was able to get there in time. Not to stop them from jumping off, rather, he got there in time to be in shooting range, hitting the 9 months pregnant Honorata with a dart full of epiphyte. Thus, she floated in the sky safely, while the two daughters of Ikuta fell to earth. However, the epiphyte injection caused Honorata to give birth early, in midair no less, and thus was born their son, Agnar. Ikuta committed suicide out of shame, and Othon decreed that henceforth the natives of Okar were not allowed within the precincts of his citadel. He constructed many robot servants, including one recurring figure, Tonto, to see to his domestic needs. However, it turns out that the epiphyte had not just caused an early delivery for Agnar, it had also robbed him of his natural gravity, as one night, father and mother woke to find their son literally floating above his crib. Othon very nearly killed the baby on the spot, convinced that someone without gravity would be useless as a warrior and thus unfit to carry the Kastaka name. But Honorata was able to save her son. The weird Shabda Oud technique she used to be impregnated by Othon's blood had rendered her sterile. She could never have another. Second, she revealed that she could still teach Agnar to be a great warrior by employing the methods of the Shabda Oud. It turns out that when the Shabda Oud agreed to send Honorata to Othon as the Empress's gift to him, they had done so with ulterior motives of their own. Honorata was supposed to use her Shabda Oud ability to control her body to produce not a son, but a hermaphrodite. 7 years later, the priestesses would come to claim the child, declare him/her the perfect androgyne, and use him/her to supplant Janus Janna, the imperial heir, and thus rule the galaxy through their hermaphrodite puppet. But all that was for nothing now, for Honorata had fallen in love with Othon and instead given him a son. Othon agreed to Honorata's plan on condition that he would subject Agnar to rigorous testing once his 7 years of training were complete. If the boy failed, Othon would kill him and then kill himself. Real Father of the Year material, this guy. And so, for 7 years in the northern wastes of their homeworld, Honorata took the baby Agnar, raised and trained him to be a peerless warrior. Under her tutelage, he became strong, fast, and cunning. But she also schooled him in ruthlessness, letting him befriend a small creature that shared the cave they lived in, only to then order him to kill that creature. When he could not prevent himself from shedding a single tear in doing so, she whipped him once across his back. She also trained him to be physically and mentally resilient, able to withstand any kind of pain. She also inducted him into the psychic mysteries of the Shabda Oud, giving him immense mental powers. All the while, she added increasing weight to his feet, thus compensating for his natural weightlessness. At last, when Agnar had managed to best his mother in hand-to-hand combat, she decided that the time was come and brought him to meet his father for the first time in his life. 2 incredibly difficult tests were put to Agnar. First, he had to defeat a giant, highly advanced killer robot that literally upped the difficulty level of the combat every 10 minutes. For the record, it took over 70 for him to finally triumph. Then, Othon placed his son's feet inside of essentially a giant crushing device that would only be deactivated if Agnar himself specifically told it to, an obvious test of his pain tolerance. To the amazement of both of his parents, Agnar remained silent throughout. The machine only stopped crushing his feet when it could crush no more, by which point they'd essentially been reduced to pulp. The mutilated appendages were removed and replaced with bionic feet. Thus, Agnar gained a little natural weight, at the very least. Thus, Othon finally accepted his son as his heir to the Kastaka lineage and the next Metabaron. And it was just as well, because around this time, shortly after the testing in fact, the Shabda Oud sent emissaries to demand an explanation from Honorata. Why hadn't she brought her hermaphrodite child to them already? Honorata gave the somewhat plausible excuse that Agnar had injured his feet. He needed time to recover. Oh, but he's totally a hermaphrodite, ladies, I swear. Honorata was dismissed and Agnar was brought into their presence. Naturally, the priestesses demanded that he drop trow and confirm his androgyny, at which point Agnar used some handy blades built into his bionic feet, laced with epiphyte, to cut two of the Shabda Oud, causing the priestesses to temporarily lose their gravity, thus catching them off guard and rendering them easy to kill. The Shabda Oud Elder was a much trickier opponent, engaging the young man in a test of psychic will. Agnar only succeeded in this with some help from his mother, effectively burning the Horde priestess's mind out. While Agnar recovered from his ordeal, Othon went into space to deal with the Horde priestess's greatest weapon, their transport, a giant bionically enhanced whale monster called a Seta Cyborg. Just one of these monstrosities is enough to lay waste to an entire sector, and the Shabda Oud had 8 in total. Since its hide proved impervious to his weapons, Othon was forced to fly his ship inside the monster and destroy it from within, but at a terrible price. The interior of the Seta Cyborg was filled with horrific toxins that did a number on Othon's respiratory system. As soon as he returned, the family began making plans to flee Okar, as it was only a matter of time until the Shabda Oud figured out what was going on and came hunting after them. Alas, Honorata could not go with either her husband or her son. Before she'd been given to Othon, in an effort to prevent her from betraying them, the Shabda Oud had replaced her heart with an organ that functioned the same way, but also was a bomb, meaning there was no way it could be surgically removed without killing her. Naturally, once the Shabda Oud realized what had happened, they would immediately assume her betrayal and activate the bomb, killing her. What the Shabda Oud had never counted on was that either Honorata would fall in love, and that she would be willing to sacrifice herself for love. Apparently, it didn't take very long for the Shabda Oud to realize they'd been betrayed, because as Othon and Agnar were departing from Okar, the bomb was activated, and Honorata was no more. Father and son watched the explosion of the woman they both loved, and vowed that they would avenge her. The Shabda Oud would pay. Eventually, father and son landed their craft, the Metabunker, on the fog-bound world of Perdita. But the bad news didn't stop there. As if it weren't enough for Agnar to lose his mother, Othon soon revealed that the damage done to his lungs by the corrosive insides of the Seta Cyborg was terminal. He would not live long enough to exact vengeance upon the Shabda Oud. But Othon had no desire to die coughing up his own lungs. What's more, he needed to be certain that Agnar had what it took to carry on the quest of vengeance by himself. And so, he challenged his own son to a duel to the death. Only by besting and killing his own father could Agnar reassure him that he could indeed fulfill the vow of vengeance. Initially, Agnar refused, but Othon was not going to take no for an answer. Even when Agnar finally managed to subdue his father with his mental powers, Othon revealed that his entire body was laced with what he calls Oko mini-bombs, explosives that are apparently both small enough to be inserted into the body surgically, while also being powerful enough to destroy not only Othon and Agnar, but the entire planet of Perdita itself. Agnar, however, discovered a flaw in his father's plan. Apparently, Oko mini-bombs cannot be inserted into the human brain without impairing the mind. Thus, the only way to safely kill Othon without triggering the bombs was to pierce his brain. Othon praised his son for his intelligence, and then demanded that his son strike home. Agnar did so, and then collapsed in grief beside his father's corpse. And so perished Othon von Salza, first of the Metabarons. A passionate man and a ruthless warrior, his legacy would haunt his descendants for generations, for in the course of his life he had successfully established 3 morbid and terrible traditions of the Castaka line. First, the test of pain tolerance through cruel mutilation of flesh and bone. Second, the replacement of said mutilated flesh with bionics. And, finally and most terribly, A Castaka Metabaron could only claim the title by killing his predecessor. When we return, Agnar pursues the quest of vengeance, and the weirdness gets downright Oedipal. Until then,